do today? We're back doing something. I don't know. Like, how do we do this? It's been a while. Let's see if people actually show up. If they know who we are. I'll
It's been
probably
a
actually
while.
share this too. You know,
Oh yeah,
make it be a
that
thing.
that
Yeah.
that share thing. Where's that at? Where's
I don't know. I don't know. Well, we'll see if people
oh
actually. Oh, um, we'll hit the button.
somebody's on. Two people, two somebodies.
And all right, that's weird. Hey, everybody, all two of you. It's probably just
Three,
Shane and
three,
Mark.
three.
Hey.
I got three.
So we got a few minutes before the official start of our program because we can start whatever we want because we can do whatever we want because nobody's really expecting much out of this. It's not that no one's in charge and we have no responsibilities. It's that the expectations are incredibly low.
It's a weird flex. Oh, look, somebody wants us to become famous.
Yeah. Shoop.
Yeah,
we had yeah.
That's great.
The lock. Terry, do you want to become famous?
I thought I already was.
Yeah. And Paul gives the accuracy that his expectations have been met. We've logged on.
That's about as good as it gets.
We do actually have, thanks to Terry's diligent preparation, an extensive work product to discuss for today and to introduce some of the things going forward. So before we get to that, I know Terry has been posting about this. His most watched videos on social media.
I only posted that once.
But I'm going to put that to a side. We'll save that for maybe a later conversation.
What?
But my question for you today, Terry, is amongst your December traditions, because my rule is when the turkey goes down, the tree goes up. And so we don't talk about turkey food anymore. Now we're in December, we're in Christmas. If you want to get orthodox, we're in the Advent season. What's your favorite tradition for your family? As opposed to what's your food?
Mark, that's wisdom. So I think
Speak for yourself.
So a couple of ways I would approach this. First off, number one, my family has this tradition that there is this breakfast item we only are allowed to eat once a year, and it's on Christmas morning, which is my wife makes these sausage and cheese rolls. So think of a cinnamon roll, but instead of the cinnamon in the middle, it's sausage and cheese, and then sliced and cooked. And then she makes cinnamon ones too. But this is the only time we're allowed to eat those ever. So that is a good one. And here's another great tradition I have, which ties to the videos, if you've seen those on my personal page, which is I love embarrassing my kids. So starting from Halloween forward, there is always an inflatable in my yard. My kids hate inflatables, which is why I love inflatables. So there's always an inflatable in my yard from about October 1st on. So right now there's a snowman in a coffee cup called Cup of Snow. Get it? And then also we have the child, or also known as Baby Yoda, with a stocking. Grogu. Yeah.
Grogu. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm tempted to buy an elf stand up to put right by my front door. I'm debating a life size Will Ferrell dressed as the elf. Have you seen the buddies that you could put in the car, by the way, Phil, that you could drive around with Will Ferrell sitting next to you?
I don't need any more encouragement to do stuff that I shouldn't do.
It's so great. You could put Will Ferrell in your passenger seat. Oh.
Yeah.
All right.
So
what is your favorite tradition?
So I'm going to go super sentimental, a little on the sappy side, and also talk about the parable of human experience for men. As a child, my Aunt Linda used to give every single cousin in the family a package of socks. So we're talking the classic white tube socks. So from like age 3, when I probably could recognize that tube socks weren't fun, to age 17, 18, 19 range, um, the emotional response to getting socks at Christmas has been pretty negative. Like, oh, come on, anything with socks. I have now reached a point where 2 things have occurred. My aunt's already passed, and so she doesn't get to have that tradition for our family anymore. She passed a number of years ago. My mom passed 11 years ago. It's been 11 years and 10 days. And she took over that role after my aunt did that. And so she got socks for all of the cousins for a long time. I now, if you ask me, like, what would I like for Christmas? Something like that. Like, I can't get socks for my aunt. And generally speaking, yeah, socks are totally cool now. But I love the interaction of simple things far more than I used to. Because as a kid, if you would ask me what I want for Christmas, it was always something dumb. Like when I was like under 10, it was the giant G.I. Joe aircraft carrier.
Who didn't want that?
Yeah.
That was not dumb when you're 10.
Yeah. No, it was accurate.
Yeah.
But I think that's the memories that I think are what matters. And I've reached a point where, for the most part, what I want to accomplish and purchase for my family and for me are memories. Stuff doesn't have that impact for me at all, like it once did. And I think that's an important transition. So with that on the table, it's time to get to our subject at hand. And title for our conversation today is, what is the good news at your congregation? And I think it's something, Phil also wanted gummy bears and jelly bellies in abundance. Walls has popped in. We can certainly talk about the volume of candy we ate from age 5 to 19 as being excessive. But I'll throw that in there. I think there's something important in this concept here about the good news. Please don't give me those. Those things are the death in a box. They are the personification of the Old Testament text. There's death in the pot. No amount of flour is going to fix that.
What was it that they called it on the Amazon review that's so good?
Oh, I don't know.
Little demon bears or something like that. It was fantastic. Anyway, back on task.
Right. So, and Terry, I think you can lead us into, because Terry's the one who did the diligent preparation of the details for today. And he needs all the praise. But if you get all the praise, you also get all the complaints.
Terry was showering listening to a podcast. That's how this show prep happened. And
too much information.
Yeah.
Too much information.
I don't know. I mean, I like to be clean. Hygiene is good. Listen, we've talked a lot about the rise and fall of Mars Hill's podcast, and the finale came out last week. By the way, set aside a lot of time. I'm still re-listening to the 2.5 hours on that finale, Phil. It was intense. But there was a statement in there about, it said, what was the good news at Mars Hill? And so it just made me think, and I called you yesterday and said, I think this is worth talking about. What is the good news at your congregation? And what I mean by that is, like, we all get the play on words there, right, Phil? We know the gospel's good news, and we'll close with that idea. So we're going to work to that. But if we're not careful, the good news that we share at our churches is not the good news of the Bible. So I'll kick us off with one of these, that kind of idea. I think for some of us at our congregations, what we see as the good news is that we're quote unquote Church of Christ in our thinking and practice. And that what's become our focus is what is best about us is, we don't have instruments, and we believe in, for lack of a better description, what the world would call baptismal regeneration. We practice those kinds of things that we have deemed to be truth, but we associate truth with the name on the sign more than Jesus Christ. And so our focus as a religion is that we practice that the great news about us is we're Church of Christ. And by the way, not everywhere, this may be regionally, I don't know about in California, but you've lived in the South for a long time. You've heard that conversation go, hey, I used to be Church of Christ, or, well, at least they're going to Church of Christ, or at least they're Church of Christ. I mean, that sometimes becomes what we focus on as the good news, is that we're Church of Christ. That becomes our good news. So that would be one way maybe that we get sidetracked on what the good news should be.
Yeah, our rhetorical question, what is the good news of your congregation, sometimes is answered with, well, we have cultural orthodoxy. We've got the right name on the door. We have the right men who come and preach for us. We order our worship in the right way. I mean, for all the independence of the unconnected churches of Christ, you go visit any of them, and they not only have the same basic structure in their assemblies, they smell the same.
Same books.
Same books, all of that. And I will suggest to you that even if you were to deconstruct off the top of that all of the things that were cultural indicators that would unique to any space, the good news of a body of believers isn't or shouldn't be merely orthodoxy. I think Paul's probably right that we use the term Church of Christ, lower C, and I'm going to think that's even more accurate. I don't know if Paul intended it that way.
Let's argue about which C is capitalized and which one is not. It's one of my favorite discussions, by the way.
Yeah. Emotionally, I'm lower C, but when it comes to branding and English rules, I'm capital C. So, because that's where it comes down for me. But that's not the point. I think he's right in that label there has most to do with connecting with other disciples rather than connecting with those who are seekers. And I think that's probably something that really has to be kind of dug through to man, that's that like gets everyone stirred up, Terry. You're really good about that. I appreciate it. I think we do need to kind of grapple with that and ask yourself the second order questions, which are, okay, if that's the good news of our congregation, and that's what matters to us, then you have to ask, okay, why? And is that outcome legitimate? Is it helpful? Is it the good news? Because look, there's a space where orthodoxy matters. There's a space or even understanding the razor line between cultural traditions and biblical traditions matters. But that isn't necessarily what should be the heart of a community of disciples that you're part of. It should be a portion or a component, but it's really easy to make it the thing.
Yeah. So another one to throw out there, and I think this was part of what was going on at Mars Hill, right, Phil? I'm not going in order, by the way. But for Mars Hill, Mark Driscoll became the good news. And what we mean by that, his persona, his presentation, his personality, his approach, that part of what made Mars Hill successful and then rapidly vanish was that it was built all around, for lack of a better term, the preacher. And you and I were talking about this week about a situation that we know of, of a congregation that similarly, and not intentionally, by the way, but really became kind of hyper-focused on their evangelist for a while. And after a situation there with that evangelist leaving, that church has never been the same, because for a long time, the good news there revolved around the person in the pulpit. And the way that looks like when you go out into the community is whenever you are tempted to go, man, you should come to church with me and hear our preacher. Like when that becomes the draw, You know, he's going to say things in a way you've never heard before. Man, you know how church is always boring? Man, our preacher's always on the edge. And that was kind of like Mark Driscoll's selling point was, right, Phil? I mean, if you want to kind of hyper-focalize it. So one of them is this cultural orthodoxy, but another one is when the guy in the pulpit becomes the main selling point, that becomes, in a sense, the good news about our church, which, by the way, there's a warning there for all of us preachers. Don't let that be about you, right? That's a huge warning for us in doing the work.
Yeah, I think there's different ways it manifests. You start thinking about this. What happens when any other person who's part of that congregation takes up the role of teaching or preaching for a Sunday? How do people behave? And I'm not talking about the very generous behavior that should take place when you have a guy who's new to preaching, new to teaching, and you encourage him and you recognize there's just a difference in experience. How horrible is it because your favorite preacher isn't there that Sunday and they got a different guy and you're like, well, I'm going to go visit somewhere else because I just can't stand to listen to so-and-so.
Which is common.
Which is I cite that from literal reality, not from, I'm just making up an illustration. You now know who the person's allegiance is too. Like you now know right now what they're struggling with. It doesn't mean there's not a solution to it. And the preachers actually do have a role there where they've got to then stop and think, okay, how can I teach and behave in a way that normalizes healthy behavior and starts pushing back against what is popular to call toxic behavior? I think that's something important to, consider, because there's a lot of middle space that takes place between these kind of edges of, okay, if it's not orthodoxy and it's not over the unique attributes and qualities of our evangelist, preacher, minister, we can all be drawn into pools. I'll talk about one that I saw a lot in the Northwest when I was preaching out in Oregon. There was a couple of key moral issues that became pretty much the distinctives that determined orthodoxy and attendance at the groups, and it was mostly around marriage, divorce, remarriage, but not exclusively. Right. But then it produced a second order consequence. That also meant that most of the preaching then was going to be around that singular subject, which then lends to the question, are you preaching this regularly because the church itself needs to be fed good, solid food on this subject, or are you preaching this for other reasons? Is there another rationale that's causing you to say, dude, twice a month, we got to have our MDR sermon, and twice a month, we got to have an illustration in sermons unrelated entirely to the subject where this is the case. By the way, you could switch that around and talk about issues of moral behavior, like modesty if you're on the coast or whatever. All of those things are going to be these sliding pieces of consequence where if you push this up to the forefront and leave it there, what are you then subjugating underneath it?
Yeah. Emerson says the burden's on preachers, in his opinion, to repair it. He says to tattoo 2 Timothy 2:2 on your forehead. We know if you do that, you'll be unemployed, though, Chris. I just joking. Listen, and what his point is that our job is to train other men to teach. Like there is this reproductive kind of cycle of training people to take our place. That doesn't happen if we never open the pulpit up to anybody else, never promote anybody else, never have anybody teach the adult class but ourselves. I mean, there has to be involvement. And by the way, I would say that applies to everything, not just preaching, but every area of our work. There needs to be this development culture. So, it's like he said, it's not a movie theater, it's a training ground. And that's exactly right. All hands on deck. We've got we've got to get people to realize that this is a collective work. It's not where people come to watch one guy work every week. And by the way, that's a challenge with our traditional approach to how we assemble. I've had some conversations the last couple of weeks with people about that, and that's just always a challenge. I wanted to get to Paul's comment, the issue of knowing we have to distinguish ourselves from every other community, a church in the community. So what do we do? What do we have that others don't? Pretty much adherence to scriptural authority becomes the one thing we feel like we can say it makes us different. I'm going to say that in one sense, I agree with you, Paul, about trying to distinguish ourselves. But the other sense is simply this. I don't think I should make it a concerted effort that I am trying to distinguish myself from other people and other places in the community. I think if I just teach the truth about Jesus and the good news about Jesus, that's going to do it on its own. And that's unfortunate that religious people don't agree on the truth. I think, and the reason I'm saying it that way is I think we need to be careful that first off, we don't start as we view ourselves into competition with the other churches in the area. But then secondly, I think sometimes we've gotten so much to that, hey, here's why we're better than everywhere else, that we've actually overlooked some things that make those places better than us in other areas. And we need to step back and just get to the adherence of, here's the gospel message. Here's Jesus. Here's what that looks like, rather than the comparison game of why we're better than the others or any of those kind of things. And I say that maybe just from personal experience, that when I've gotten sucked into that and when I used to care about the number of conversions and count those and sometimes even boast in those, that's just a dangerous mindset and perspective we have to be careful about. And so I just want to kind of warn us about that perspective. And I think that creates some of this problem about this changing what our focus is because it does become about, what do I have that the church next door doesn't have? Like, what do we have that they don't have? And I need to focus on the gospel, period.
Yeah, Ruben brings up this, and I think it's important to kind of stop for a moment before we go to our next component of this question. We've heard this response to opening the pulpit to other guys. We need to strive for excellence. We need to have our best guys in the pulpit. You can do both. You can open up the pulpit in the right contexts to continue to give improvement space, while at the same time emphasizing that those who have already reached an acceptable level of competency are going to be managing in that other space. And so that's why traditionally you found invitations as a great stepping stone. But I'll also include calls to worship, home Bible studies, group teaching settings, team teaching settings.
We have Lord's Supper talks that are similar to invitations.
Michael Walls and I think one of the first times that either of us spoke on a Sunday in either way, we're actually assigned subjects and we were split the evening. And the elders gave us, our pointer sheets, and it says, you're going to talk about this, and then you're going to talk about that. And I don't know if Mike remembers that, but that's like a way in which you can incrementally create an opportunity to make things available, but also effective. And you can still stream all of that and put it out to your own heart's content and make great media portions of it. One of the things that's hard to do, but we don't do, is making great value of those events for a broader context. There's a lot of good that comes from it.
Yeah. Because we don't want to go super long today. One more of these things that I think sometimes becomes the good news for our congregation is, hey, the good news here is we'll teach you how to be successful just in general. And for sometimes the gospel, we turn the gospel into a self-help kind of manual, right? And so a couple of ways is we may talk about how that, hey, listen, we'll fix your marriage. You're having trouble in your marriage. Come to where I go to church. That the good news about my church is they can teach you about how marriage should be, or how to raise your kids, or how to be a successful business person, or how to be a leader, or any of those things in life. And I think one of the things to keep in mind about this, Phil, is where the struggle is do I believe that if I teach somebody how to submit and be a disciple to Christ, that they'll be successful in other areas like their marriage and their home if they do that? Absolutely. But the selling point is not become a Christian so you can fix your marriage. That's, by the way, that's just a different version of the health and wealth gospel that we often criticize. You know, the health and wealth gospel is the idea of, hey, if you donate, you'll get back tenfold. Well, when you say if you become a Christian, your life will be successful, you're practicing the same kind of exchange rate type idea, just with different currency. And so, again, we should not promote that the good news about coming to church is that it's going to fix your life and make you a successful person. Because that's not the way that we're supposed to do that. That was another one of those ideas I think that need to be thrown out there, which, by the way, I think we do a lot. I think we do that a whole lot.
Right. And the mechanic of accomplishing that goal is as important as the goal itself, if not more so. Here's another way to kind of connect those two dots together. Paul had talked earlier about the distinctive nature of biblical authority being a hallmark of some, attempts to identify ourselves and to create brand separation and elevate. I'm using marketing terms, and I know Paul can immediately totally catch all that. Here's something that's actually, I think, a great connection. If you actually start making Jesus and him crucified and the story of the cross and the full theological symphony of God's plan of redemption, the centerpiece of your spiritual existence, then all of the rest of those things, they start showing up stronger and stronger. And here's an illustration of that. If you go look at McMegachurch 1, McMegachurch 2, McMegachurch 3 in your local communities, you will find very little brand differential between those McMegachurches. They're very similar. There's good reasons why they've done that to create their culture. I say good in the sense of there's an effective concept underneath it. And you're going to find good people there too, who are also going to be striving to be successful parents. But you can also see some hollowness in their theology, much like the hollowness inside of Chicken McNugget. It's not going to be the filling that you need to sustain you in the fullness of a relationship with God. And so I would argue that it's important to really hone in on what Paul emphasizes in his letter to the Church of Corinth, letter number 1 of potentially 3 or more, and says, Jesus and him crucified, or I consider myself, a slave contextually to Christ, and so I'm indebted to him. I really think it's important and valuable for us to understand that the good news of a local church should be, and this is the tip off, the good news. And the more we accomplish the elevation of that to the top of our priority tree, we still have all the room we need to teach on the home, to teach on leadership, to teach on marriage, to teach on child rearing, to teach on moral issues, to talk about marriage, divorce, and remarriage. All those spaces have their value, but they exist in the shadow of the cross. And I think sometimes we allow things to block the cross from view.
Yeah, and that's really the point, right, of what we're trying to say today is don't get distracted by all the things that you can use as your marketing and branding. I mean, at the end of the day, I think the cross has to be the center of all of this. One of our shepherds here is a big Michael Gorman fan, and I think he references this by Gorman a lot, that Gorman talks about how we need to have cruciformed lives, which is the idea of, the cross being the center point, the focal point. And that's the key to all of this. Look, the good news at your church should be the good news about Jesus Christ, just at the end of the day.
I also want to highlight a key thing. I think it touches on to a hidden comment from Chris that he talks about generational change in some point with some other things he said. As much as the present reality is a graying church, the statistical reality is that the growing churches of today are inverting that reality for all kinds of good reasons. And local churches are also, wait for it, growing.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about their rate of growth. I would dispute the inflated growth rate of the past. I think it's factually inaccurate. But local churches are growing in comparison to the past. The real question for us is to kind of think about what that implies. Again, almost all the churches I know they're growing, they're actually emphasizing the cross.
Right.
They're growing in communities where you would not expect to see a living tree taking root. And I think that's an amazing aspect of a reconsideration of the good news. Like, okay, this is what it's supposed to be doing. Like, and it should be an embrace into the grace of God, an understanding of our repentance, a recognition of our transformation in the grave of baptism. All that is part of the theology of this change. But I think it really needs to be the high level emphasis of the focus of the believers is to really shift that priority off of personalities. And here's a reality. With the practical diminishing of the number of men willing to preach and the number of local churches that I presently know looking for an evangelist across the entire U.S. being so high, there's going to be some clarity moments for lots of local churches to figure out, what do we do now? And I don't have answers for them. I barely have an answer for me. So I certainly don't know if it's a good answer.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be interesting. I think where the church as a whole is in a transition in a way that a lot of people don't. When you look at it from knowing all of these empty works and places, we're in a period of transition that's going to be interesting to see how we forge ahead. And I think one of the things that Chris has really been emphasizing in the last 6 months, and I think is really true, is, and you see this a lot with Emerson coming up, we've really got to do a better job at training people how to preach and teach without necessarily being pulpit preachers and full-time evangelists. And we've got to do a better job of that. That's going to be part of the key to the survival going forward. And that really starts with that becoming an emphasis in our local bodies of doing that. But to get back to what we're saying, the best way to do that is to teach people to be disciples, because part of your natural growth of discipleship leads you to teaching. That's part of the natural growth in that process. And we just need to understand that from that way.
Yeah, and we need to, again, normalize that expectation, that it's normal for the members of the body at the church you're part of to take a part in the leadership and training of the generations around them. It doesn't necessarily mean, okay, they got to preach sermons. It means that they're taking a part in the mentorship and development of the disciples that they are connected with. And so you pick and choose. Leaders pick and choose. Like, okay, you're really good at this, so you're going to do this. And you're really good at that, and you're going to do that.
One of the things, too, by the way, that I think the normal, just every person in the building needs to get more in tune with is we need to stop emphasizing presentation style and presentation ability so much. And we need to start really looking at what is the message, and the message needs to be what's concerned. Listen, there's a lot of guys that I know of, and you know of, Phil, that people will say they're just not a good preacher, but their message content is fantastic. People aren't judging them on whether they present the truth. They're judging them on how they present it. I'm not saying that's not important, but we need to focus on that less. And we need to get back to what matters is the message that's being shared.
I don't think we can get there. I think it's going to be a needed transformation. And I think all the personal introspection that comes from listening to some of these tragic implosions, like the rise and fall of Marsville, and that's a real tragedy. It's a tragedy that plays out in the landscape of individual humans' lives, like people made in the image of God. And I lay this at the very end because I think it's important. Listening to the closing broadcast, they're talking about one of the former participants in their music and media empire, talking about having moments of PTSD where he just could not function because of the trauma he experienced in being part of that toxic culture. And I say that with a little trepidation because I know that those terms are loaded and heavy and impactful for many. But I also know this, that also describes the experiences of some of our brethren within the local churches they've been part of. That they too bear some of those same scars, and it perks up when enough impetus is placed on them that they feel the pain again, when they kind of let their guard down. If you want to consider why some of the nearly 47% of preachers in the United States considered stopping of preaching seriously in the last 18 months, then you got to ask yourself the question, okay, what's going on that would make them feel that way? Well, it's not just because preaching is hard. It's always been hard. It's not just because brethren say things that hurt other brethren. That's always been the case. There's some other factors that are important for us to consider. And I think this is one of the issues that can help sort through some of that. Hey, this is about the end of our scheduled time for today. We're going to continue to touch on some of these subjects going forward. And Terry and I have talked about this. I think at some point before the turn of the year, maybe right afterwards, we're going to do kind of a modest review. It might even not be on a Tuesday of the entire Mars Hill broadcast. I think it'd be a worthy exchange. But there's two criteria for that. If you want to be a part of it and actually be live with us, you got to go
on camera,
like on camera. Then hey, straight up watch it all and then contact Terry or I. It's going to be a community conversation, like we kind of did with the closer of our Corinthians study and James studies, where we had like multiple guys, and let's talk about it. And there'll probably be a couple guys that don't preach anymore that might participate as well, and I think that'll be an important part of the dialogue. Terry, you got anything to close out for today?
Hey, just thanks. We had a lot of people join in today. I really appreciate it, and it was a great discussion. And so this just as the end of the year comes to a close, and everybody's pretty stressed. There's a lot going on, obviously. Just remember to keep, for lack of a better cliche, first things first. And I would encourage, especially by the way, if you're a planner, we're not going to get into that. I don't want to get into that. But if you're a planner, think about the things we said today about your plans going forward. How do your plans for the next year, how do they reflect the good news about Jesus? How's that going to be the focal point of your preaching and of your work? Not just what's in the pulpit, but your work as an entirety. And if you've not asked that question, that needs to be your primary question going forward, is how does this emphasize that?
Yeah. I'll add this, that also includes your reading plans. How are you going to read systematically through the Bible this year and next year to really get a good, solid connection with the story of Christ? And also a shameless plug. Luke Chandler and I are leading a tour into Israel in May. This is absolutely shameless.
Shameless.
But look, I don't actually get any kind of great value out of this. But the folks who do go get a great value of it. And the reason I mention it is we're almost full. And so if you're interested in traveling with a nerd, another nerd, and then Paul and Laura Hammonds and a few others, then come join us. And by the way, I'm saying nerd, that's Luke and I. We're just two different types of nerds. He's an archaeological nerd. I'm a pop culture biblical nerd. And so I think we'll produce a really enjoyable experience and really enrich folks' understanding of the Bible. And so shameless plug. We can do that. That's my little plug for the day, but I'll add this encouragement at the close. Holidays are hard for a lot of folks. Thanksgiving to Christmas can be a wonderful time for family, but here's a specific opportunity. There are many members of the body of Christ who do not have the rich family experience that you may share. Take a moment to not only pray for them, but go spend a little time with them. They may have no more living family. They may not have any community of close kin to be around. And the hour you share with them, the 2 hours you share with them, will be the greatest gift that you can give to them for the season. They may have lost their mom and their dad. They may have lost everyone around them, but they should still have their family in Christ. Your preaching can reflect that, but your life should really be a blazing beacon of this is how it should be. This is how family should be. Take care, everybody. If we can help you in some way, just let us know. Have a great day.